Good morning, sir. Good morning, classmate. We are the group 5 and our topic for today is all about the warriors, the Japanese occupation. Introduction. Japanese military expansion in the Asia-Pacific region had made confrontation and war with the United States increasingly certain. In preparation for war on July 26, 1941, General Douglas MacArthur brought the 12,000-strong Philippine scout under his command with the 16 American soldiers stationed in the Philippines. The attack on the Philippines started on December 8, 1941, 10 hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. As the Pearl Harbor, the American aircraft were extremely destroyed in the ground. Lacking air cover, the American Asiatic Fleet in the Philippines withdrew to Java on December 12, 1941. Japanese troops landed at the Lingayen Gulf on December 22, 1941 and advanced across central Luzon towards Manila. On the advance of President Quezon, General MacArthur declared Manila an open city on December 25, 1941 and removed the Commonwealth governor to corridor. The Japanese occupied Manila on January 2, 1942. Ginawang open city yung Manila dahil upang maiwasan na ang pagkasira nito ng salakay ng Japan ang Commonwealth of the Philippines. Why did Japan attack the Philippines? The Japanese military had this concept of United Asian Sphere like the current European Union. To achieve this, all foreign occupiers must be expelled in Asia. Upang makamit ito, lahat ng mananakop na dayuhan ay dapat pataliksikin sa Asia. The Philippines was under American occupation. Japan saw this an unjust occupation and they needed to liberate the Philippines from this foreigner. Gusto ng Japan na palayain ang mga Pilipino sa mga Amerika dahil sa nakikita nilang hindi makatarungan ng paghawak ng mga Amerika sa mga Pilipino. Japan had ambitious plan to dominate and conquer the whole of Asia. Gusto ng Japan na sila yung mangibabaw sa buong silangan ng Asia, to acquire staging areas and supply base, to enhance operation, to secure communication lines from the Japanese home island. How did Japan invaded the Philippines? Despite the 9 hours warning of the outbreak of hostilities with Japan, the commander of the United States Army Air Force in the Philippines, Lieutenant General Douglas MacArthur, was paralyzed by indecision during these crucial hours and failed to bring his force to a state of readiness to meet Japan attack. MacArthur's indecision combined with his poor military judgment and slackness in his command structure led the destruction of half of his air force on the ground and his troops being denied adequate supplies to withstand and lightly siege. Road to war. Japan withdrew from the League of Nations and provoked an undeclared war with China. It massacred in division of Nanjing event, also known as the Rape of Nanking. Yung Rape of Nanking, ito yung pagpatay at pag-rape ng mga Japanese sa mga residente ng Nanking or Nanjing. It's allied itself to the Axis power. Ang Axis power, pinaglalaban nila ang World War II sa pagitan ng dalawang pangunahing pangkat ng mga bansa. Nakilala sila bilang Axis power at ang Allied power. Ang pangunahing Axis power ay ang Germany, Italy, and Japan. Sa Buro Caruso, the United States imposed an embargo on oil and scrap metal export to Japan. Saburo Caruso, a career diplomat, negotiated peace and order with the U.S. while Japan secretly planned attack on Pearl Harbor. Road to war while preparing for independence under Tiding McDuffie Act. The Philippine Army was re-established because the Americans knew that Japan will invade soon. Si Saburo Caruso, isang career diplomat na nakipag-ayos ng kapayapaan at kaayusan sa US. Ang Tithing McDuffie Act, ito yung batas na Independence Act na naisabatas noong March 24, 1934. Ito ay isang federal law na naitatag para sa Pilipinas upang maging isang malayang bansa pagkatapos ng 10 taon na paglipat. Preparation for Independence and War. Press Quezon summoned General Douglas MacArthur, retired chairman of the Joint Chief of the Staff of the U.S. to prepare the Philippine military. He assumed the rank Field Marshal of the Philippines Army. Training of citizen soldiers was undertaken with the implementation of PMT and ROTC. PMT, Philippine Military Training, and ROTC, Reverse Office Training Corps. Training was saddled with the lack of adequate equipment and ammunition. Filipinos made their own headgears from coconut fiber called ginit. Belts were made from abaca fiber instead of leather. Shoes were manufactured locally by Ang Tibay. Ginit ay isang coconut sheet from the leaves and base of coconut leaves. At ang abaca ay binominal na pangalang Musa textilis ay isang uri ng saging na katutubong sa Pilipinas na lumago bilang isang komersyal na pananim sa Pilipinas, Ecuador at Costa Rica. Ang halaman na nakilala rin bilang Manila hemp ay ang malaking kahalagahan sa ekonomiya na inani para sa hibla nito at tinatawag ding abakan sa Manila na nakuha mula sa dahon. And ito po yung mga example ng ito po yung mga example ng shoes. Ito po yung example ng ginit, and then po ito yung example ng abaca. Due to the growing difference between Quezon and MacArthur asked President Roosevelt to recall his to U.S. service. The American allowed false rumors about Japan to circulate the country to assure Filipinos that everything is secure. Hinayaan ng mga Amerikano na magkalat ng false rumor about Japan para masecure nila yung mga Pilipino ay iligtas. Attack. Air attack took place at Baguio, Tarlac at the Naval Air Installation of Subic. Zambales and Clark, Pampanga in the South Davao received its first air raid on the same day. The Japan planned to move swiftly and win victories before the United States could respond with force. The Japanese landing at Lingayen brought Lieutenant General Masaharu Homa, Commander of Chief of the Japanese force in the Philippines. Si General Masaharu is the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. Homa commanded the Japanese Fourth Army, which invaded the Philippines and perpetrated the Bataan Death March. USAFFE, United States Armed Forces in the Far East, retreated to Bataan and waited for reinforcement from the U.S. January 2, 1942, the first Japanese contingent entered Manila, where cheered on as liberator. Lieutenant General Homa declared the end of American rule in the Philippines and imposed martial law on all occupied areas. Japan Martial Law. Japan claimed that it was creating Asia for Asian. On January 3, 1942, General Masaharu Homa issued a proclamation announced the end of the American occupation and the imposition of martial law in the country. First orders, surrender of firearms. Those who will still go with weapons were detailed the dangers of Fort Santiago and other detention posts. Detention camp became place of torture. Priests suspected of engaging in subversion activities were also imprisoned. As early as January 14, 1942, Colonel Borosawa issued a declaration to Christians in the Philippines. By 1943, Paris priests were being required to use their pulpits to convince the people that it was useless to resist sa Japanese rule. Sabi yung yung mga pari daw required daw silang gamitin yung pulpits nila para i-convince yung mga tao na wala silang laban sa mga Japanese rule. General Homa allowed the law that then enforced the Commonwealth to stay for the moment. He ordered all public officials to continue to discharge their duties. Curfew first from 8 p.m. 6 a.m. then from 12 midnight to 6 a.m. Total blackout was lifted on May 4, 1942 after the fall of Bataan. Arbitrary arrests and execution were done by Kempeitai military police any time of the day. Many were also executed were suspect of being with the resistance movement. No one could travel without a pass from its army. This prohibition is travel was lifted after the fall of Corridor. Taliban, La Vanguardia, Tribune, and Liwayway were allowed to continue publication but under rigid censorship by the government. Many theaters switched from movie to stage slow. Life during the wartime years. Philippines was an occupied country. Means of production were under the control of the Japanese. Few banks were allowed to operate. Buying and selling became the source of income by the Filipinos. Mickey Mouse money was circulated and provoked inflation, such alarming situation. Ang tinatawag na Mickey Mouse money ng mga lokal na Pilipino, walang halaga ito at matapos na mapuka ng mga Hapon at tulinada ito ay sinunog. Inatasan ng mga tropang Hapon na sirain ng mga anumang natitirang pera bago ang kapit. Food shortage was alarming. Outbreak of epidemics were prevalent such as dysentery, malaria, TB causing death of many people. People live in constant fear and apprehension. 5 mortal enemies of Filipinos: Japanese military, disease, guerrillas, hunger, and Japanese paid Filipino. Kurang most feared word inward wave and handment come here. Signed disaster and outerward wave of handment dismiss or scrum. Japanese encouraged the development of Tagalog and gave it an impetus never before witnessed. Death March. April 9, 1942, the prisoners were disarmed and was sold to march to Balanga. April 10, 1942, the Japanese assembled about 76,000 prisoners of war, 10,000 Americans and 66,000 Filipinos for a non-stop march for 5 days from Maribeles, Bataan to San Fernando, Pampanga. Those who could not continue or keep up were shot down or bayoneted. At the end of the march were 200 Americans and 10,000 Filipinos who perished. Survivors were taken to Camp Odinel in Capas, Tarlac, April 15, 1942, where many more dead and starvation disease left 50,000 survivors. Reforming the Philippine government. On December 2, 1942, the Kalipa-B Kapisanan sa paglilingkod sa bagong Pilipinas, a non-political party was established. Kalipa-B's aim was to bring about the rapid reconstruction of the Philippines, the rehabilitation of the Filipino people. June 18, 1943, Kalipa-B members appoint and commit to nominate the members to Preparatory Commission of the Philippine Independence (PCPI). When Laurel Aquino Vargas returned to Manila from Tokyo, the government announced 2 days later the inauguration of the Republic of the Philippines would be October 14. The Japanese worked for the establishment of Philippines into the greatest co-prosperity sphere, reforming the Philippines government. Ang layunin ng Kalipa-B ay upang maisagawa ang mabilis na muling pagtayo ng Pilipinas at rebelasyon ng sambayanan. The Second Republic of the Philippines. June 19, 1943, Kalipa-B, only political party that time, held convention and elected 20 members of Preparatory Commission for Philippines Independence (PCPI). Please cancel Philippine independence as in charge of framing a constitution from the forthcoming republic to elect 54 members of National Assembly, President Jose P. Laurel, Vice President Benigno Aquino, Sr. Ramon Anesena, the Second Republic of the Philippines. Inauguration, October 14, 1942, on the step of the Legislative Building in Manila, Philippine flag was hoisted and the national anthem was played. Meanwhile, Japanese started using propaganda to gain trust, confidence of Filipinos who refused to cooperate with them. Hong Giant posters distribute their materials that contain slogans such as "The Republic belongs to the Filipinos." Also, use newspaper, movies, and other publicize the same idea. Promoting Japanese propaganda was one of the main objectives of the Kalipa-B, but still, Japanese failed to gain the trust of the Filipinos. The puppet government. Although the Japanese had promised independence for the island after occupation, they instantly organized a Council of State through which they directed civil affairs until October 1943, when they declared the Philippine Independence Republic. The only political party allowed during the occupation was the Japanese organized Kalipa-B. During the occupation, most Filipinos remained loyal to the United States, and war crimes committed by force of the Empire of Japan against surrendered Allied forces and civilians were documented. On the same day, the Philippine Executive Commission was established by the Japanese High Command, composed of Mr. Vargas as chairman with the other 6 Filipinos department secretly, namely Benigno S. Aquino, Commissioner of the Interior; Antonio de las Alas, Finance; Jose P. Laurel, Justice; Rafael Alunan, Agriculture and Commerce; Claro M. Recto, Education, Health, Republic Welfare; Kitan Paredes, Public Works and Communication. The Philippine Executive Commission, established on January 23, 1942, Chairperson George Vargas, Department Head Interior Benigno Aquino, Senior Finance Antonio de las Alas, Justice Jose P. Laurel, Education, Health, Public Welfare Carlo M. Recto, Public Works Communication Kitan Paredes, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court Jose Yulo. New Constitution, noticeably lack of Bills of Right, contain 12 articles lifted from the 1935 Constitution that fitted and wishes of the Japanese, was meant to be effect only temporarily while the Philippines still in chaos. September 4, 1943, Constitution was brought to the public. September 7, 1943, ratification of the Japanese-sponsored Constitution, Preamble 12 Article. October 14, 1943, the inauguration of the Second Philippine Republic. However, this puppet republic was not taken seriously by the people as well as the international community. Laurel and the rest of Philippine leaders served as a puppet of the Japanese authorities for real executive and legislative powers laid to the hand of the Japanese military leaders. Problems of the Republic. Problems of the Republic. During his term in office, Laurel was faced with various problems that the country was experiencing, such as the following: shortage of foods, clothing, oil, other necessities, heavy Japanese military presence through the entire region, control of transportation, media, and communication. Japanese occupation of the Philippines was opposed by active and successful underground and guerrilla activity that increased over the years that eventually covered a large portion of the country. The guerrilla movement continued to grow in spite of Japanese campaign against them. The island of Mindanao, being farther from the central of Japan occupation, had 38,000 guerrillas who were eventually consolidated under the command of American civil engineer Colonel Wendell Fertig. One resistance group in the central Luzon area was known as the Hukbalahap, Hukbo ng Bayan ng Laban ng Hapon, or the People Anti-Japanese Army, organized in early 1942. One resistance group in the central Luzon area was known as the Hukbalahap, Hukbo ng Bayan Laban ng Hapon, or the People Anti-Japanese, organized in early 1942. Under the leadership of Luis Tarroc, a Communist Party member since 1939. USAFE force in Bataan continued to oppose the Japanese. They withstood the attack of the enemy, delayed General Homa timetable. The expected capture of the Philippines in 60 days lasted for 30 months. There was resistance in Panay and Mindanao. March 1942, Quezon and his family were evacuated from Corregidor to Australia. He left Chief Justice Jose Abad Santos as acting president in case he and Vice President Ospeña were killed or captured by the Japanese. Quezon was later brought the U.S. where he set up government in Asal in Washington. The NAS District and Neighborhood Association organized by Chairman Vargas on August 8, 1942, provides means of self-protection to local residents. The Honks agreed fight the Japanese and unified guerrilla army. Farmers of Pampanga banded together and created local bridge for their protection. Luis Tarroc, Juan Filio, Castro Alejandrino. They agree to call their organization Hukbo ng Bayan Laban sa Hapon, or Hukabalahap. Luis Tarroc was the leader. Alejandro was the right-hand member, was simply called Hawks. The Return of Magellan. On October 20, 1944, MacArthur waded ashore into the Philippine island of Leyte. That day he made radio broadcast in which he declared, "People on the Philippines, I have returned." In January 1945, his force invaded the main Philippine island of Luzon. In February, Japanese forces at Bataan were cut off and Corridor was captured. Manila, the Philippine capital, fell in March and June. MacArthur announced his offensive operation on Luzon to be at end. Although scattered Japanese resistance continued till the end of the war, in August only were the third of the men MacArthur left behind March 1942 survived to see his return. "I am a little late," he told them, "but we finally came." Surrender of Japan. September 2, 1945. By the end of July 1945, the Imperial Japanese Navy was incapable of conducting operation and allied invasion of Japan was imminent. Japan was pressuring the Soviet of mediate peace that favorable to Japan, while the Soviet was secretly planning to attack Japan. August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. August 8, 1945, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan. August 9, 1945, the Soviet Union invaded the Imperial Japanese puppet state of Manchukuo. Later that same day, the United States dropped second atomic bomb, this time on the city of Nagasaki. Emperor Hirohito Inverne and ordered the Big Six to accept the terms for ending the war that Allies had set down the Potsdam Declaration. The surrender ceremony was held on September 2 aboard the United States Navy battle USS Misohoro BB-63, at which officials from the Japanese government signed the Japanese Instrument of Surrender Day, ending the hostilities in World War II. The state of war with Japan and Allies formally ended when the Treaty of San Francisco came into force on April 28, 1952. 4 more years passed before Japan, the Soviet Union, signed the Soviet-Japanese Joint Declaration of 1956, which formally brought an end to their state of war. Thank you.